Sophie Cunningham, questionable right elbow. When the hell did that happen? When did that pop up? Did it pop up after she posted that graphic from Evelyn about going rogue on her Instagram and Caitlin Clark commented on it? Is that when this happened? Indiana Fever? Everybody knows that you guys are attempting to punish Sophie Cunningham. We all know it. We all see it. This is ridiculous. Look at the first comment, Evelyn. You guys are a clown organization. Here it says, Sophie hurt her elbow writing this for Stephanie White, didn't she? This is what Sophie Cunningham had. I will not pass to Caitlin again. I will not pass to Caitlin Clark again. This is what they forced Sophie Cunningham to do. Okay, that's how.
Something doesn't add up about that injury report. And if you've been paying close attention to what's happening with the Indiana Fever, you probably felt it immediately. On Wednesday morning, Sophie Cunningham, one of the toughest, most fearless players on the roster, suddenly appeared on the injury report. The reason? A right elbow issue. Her status? Questionable. Just like that. The strange part is that nobody seems to know when it happened. There was no obvious moment during a game, no visible injury scare, and no indication anything was wrong. In fact, Cunningham went through practice without showing any noticeable discomfort. She looked fine. She participated normally. Nothing suggested an injury serious enough to raise concerns. Yet somehow, her name was suddenly sitting on the report, leaving fans with more questions than answers.
Fine. Sophie, well, she came out with something yesterday on X, kind of saying they went rogue, right? They went rogue. The play wasn't drawn up like that. And yeah, now she's questionable. Now it looked like she's getting put on the bench. Look like she got splinter in the cheeks coming up in the next game. Man, what is going on here, man? Look, this is what I be saying with the Indiana Fever, all right? They don't 100% have my full trust. And
reporters who attended the practice said Cunningham moved through the entire session without any obvious limitations. No visible discomfort. No moments that suggested an elbow issue was affecting her. Everything appeared completely routine. And yet, when the injury report was released, there it was, questionable with a right elbow injury. The timing immediately caught people's attention. It came right after Cunningham had become one of Caitlin Clark's most vocal supporters on the court, actively looking to get her involved in the offense and openly celebrating her success. Whether that's merely a coincidence or something more, fans quickly started connecting the dots and asking questions. Think about that for a moment. A player appears healthy in practice. No clear injury incident is identified. Then suddenly her status changes and speculation begins to spread. In a season already filled with intense scrutiny, every unusual decision becomes part of a much larger conversation. And that's exactly why this injury report generated so much attention. It wasn't just the designation itself, it was the timing, the lack of clear explanation, and the questions that naturally followed.
Pass got through. It was a risky pass that paid off in the end, and Caitlin Clark was able to knock down this big three. And you can see she didn't even have a huge celebration after this. She kind of did the 3-point hand signals to Cody McMahon. And if you guys didn't know, they had this rivalry in college, actually. Iowa and Ohio State. They had this huge rivalry, and her and Cody used to go back and forth. One of the funniest things also from this play was just the reaction of everyone in the background. Like, if you look at the Mystics coach, like, it looks like he's almost smiling like, yeah, man, that's going in. And then if you look at Lucy Olson, she's also like kind of smiling. I'm not saying that they like wanted the shot to go in, but I think it's one of those things where you just kind of shake your head and smile because you're like, it's freaking Caitlin Clark.
Because that moment, that pass, that basket, that celebration may explain why so many people are paying attention to what's happening inside this franchise right now. When the game was on the line, Cunningham didn't hesitate. She saw Caitlin Clark, trusted her instincts, and put the ball in Clark's hands when it mattered most. It was a simple basketball decision, but it carried weight. The pressure was high, the moment was big, and Clark responded the way star players are expected to respond. She delivered. What happened next was just as noticeable. Cunningham celebrated the play with genuine enthusiasm. No second thoughts. No holding back. She reacted the way teammates often do when a clutch shot changes the outcome of a game. The excitement carried beyond the final buzzer as well, with public praise and social media posts that made her support impossible to miss. To many fans, that sequence represented something larger than a single possession. It showcased trust, confidence, and a willingness to embrace the team's biggest star in the biggest moments. Whether people agree with that interpretation or not, it's a storyline that has continued to gain traction because it speaks to a question many have been asking all season. Who fully embraces Clark's role at the center of the franchise and who doesn't? Fair or unfair, that debate has become one of the defining conversations surrounding the Indiana Fever, and moments like this only add fuel to it.
This social media meme that's been going around that Sophie posted on her social media as well. This started as a meme and then she shared it. And Caitlin Clark actually commented along with several others. No way Sophie just posted this. They really went rogue on the final play. Well, let's just scroll down. J-Mac. This was an exact quote. An exact quote from Lexi Hull on the radio. Quote, "We were trying to draw a foul there." I think Caitlin's a great basketball player. She made a read. Sophie was able to deliver a perfect pass to her. She knocked it down when it mattered. I can't say that's exactly what we drew up, but it worked. Lexi Hull literally come out and said, "This is not what we drew up."
She wasn't creating controversy. She wasn't trying to send a message. She wasn't drawing attention to herself. She was doing what teammates do. Her team won a game. A player delivered in a crucial moment. And Cunningham celebrated it openly and enthusiastically. Yet when fans saw her name appear on the injury report the very next day, questions started spreading quickly. The timing felt unusual. There was no widely reported incident, no obvious moment that explained the designation, and no clear public explanation that immediately put the speculation to rest. That's why so many people began talking about it. Maybe there is a perfectly reasonable explanation. Maybe the elbow issue had been lingering behind the scenes all along. But from the outside looking in, the sequence of events was enough to raise eyebrows and fuel debate among a fan base that is already scrutinizing every move surrounding this team. And that brings us to Stephanie White. Because while Cunningham's injury designation became a major talking point among fans, White was standing in front of reporters making comments that many observers viewed as far more revealing than the injury report itself. Not because of what she said directly, but because of what her remarks seemed to suggest about the challenges facing this franchise. At the center of the conversation isn't a single injury report, a single game, or even a single player. It's the larger question that has followed the Indiana Fever all season. How does an organization balance the expectations, attention, and pressure that come with having one of the biggest stars in the sport? For many fans, that's where the Real story begins.
Answer for the fans, I think, I have to answer to our team, and our franchise. And we're trying to win ball games. We're not trying to appease the masses. We're trying to win ball games. And so I think for us, figuring it out on a consistent basis, our big three are learning to play together again. With Caitlin missing as much time as she did a year ago, and finding a flow does take time, especially when Kelsey and Aaliyah had the ball in their hands so much a year ago. And then we've got other pieces that are trying to find their way as well. I think when you see us find continuity, you'll see what seems to be easier shot opportunities, and better shot quality. And that's what I'm focused on, is the best shot quality.
We're not trying to appease the masses. That quote immediately caught people's attention because of what it seemed to represent. Whether Stephanie White intended it that way or not, many fans heard those words and interpreted them as a dismissal of the very audience that has helped fuel the Indiana Fever's rise in visibility. Think about the context. This is a franchise operating under a national spotlight unlike anything it had experienced before. Attendance is up. Television audiences are larger. Every game generates headlines, debate, and endless discussion. Much of that attention is tied to one reality. Caitlin Clark's arrival transformed the level of interest surrounding the team. So when fans hear a statement about not trying to appease the masses, some naturally push back. One fan on social media summed up that frustration by arguing that the audience isn't asking for anything unreasonable. In that fan's view, people tune in because they want to watch exciting basketball, they want to see stars perform, and they want to watch a team maximize the talents of its best players. That perspective resonates with a lot of people because, at its core, sports is a simple business. Fans invest their time, energy, and money because they enjoy watching great players compete at the highest level. When those players succeed, everyone benefits. The team, the league, the television partners, and the fans themselves. The debate isn't really about appeasing anyone. It's about whether the team's approach is putting its players in the best position to succeed. That's why this conversation refuses to disappear. Critics aren't necessarily demanding that the coaching staff abandon its philosophy or completely redesign the offense. What they're asking is much simpler. If you have a player capable of changing a game, shouldn't the system be built to maximize those strengths? For many observers, that's the question at the center of everything happening around the Fever right now. And the fact that fans are still asking it this far into the season is exactly why the scrutiny continues to grow.
Why is not the right coach, Caitlin? It was like game 3 before the first injury, where Caitlin Clark was averaging like 21 points per, even I think I was averaging 21 points per game. Like, Stephanie was not the right coach, and I was like dead set on it when we heard about Caitlin, who had a wide open pass to Kelsey Mitchell, and she like slowed it down, and it's like, oh yeah, you know, or even against the Liberty when she went on that absolute nuclear run, and she's like, oh, Steph wouldn't have been happy when I shot the fourth one. And it's like it was very obvious early that Steph White is a pragmatic coach, and Caitlin Clark is a flair maverick player. But there's one thing I don't actually think,
because for many critics, the issue goes beyond public relations or media narratives. The real concern is basketball. The argument being made by fans is straightforward. Caitlin Clark's greatest strengths have always been tied to her ability to create offense with the ball in her hands, stretch defenses far beyond the three-point line, and force opponents to account for her every second she is on the floor. That's what makes her difficult to defend. When Clark is actively initiating the offense, defenses face impossible choices. Press too high and she can attack. Collapse into the lane and she can find open teammates. Give her space and she can punish teams from deep. Every possession becomes a constant calculation for opposing coaches. Many fans believe that when those opportunities become less frequent, the entire dynamic of the offense changes. It's not simply about reducing one player's statistics. It's about reducing the pressure that player places on the defense. The less involved she is as a primary creator, the less stress opposing teams have to manage. And when that pressure decreases, the floor can feel smaller for everyone else. That is why so much of the discussion surrounding the Fever has centered on offensive philosophy. Supporters of Clark argue that maximizing her strengths should naturally maximize the team's overall effectiveness. They point to stretches where the offense appears more fluid, faster, and more dangerous when she is given greater control of the action. Whether that assessment is completely fair or not, it has become one of the dominant conversations surrounding the franchise. And that's where the frustration grows. Because when fans voice those concerns, many aren't asking for special treatment, celebrity accommodations, or a system built around popularity. They believe they are making a basketball argument. They believe they are pointing to what they see on the court and asking why the team's most unique offensive weapon isn't being utilized even more aggressively. So when those concerns are met with comments that some interpret as dismissive of outside opinions, the reaction becomes even stronger. The irony, according to critics, is that the debate was never really about pleasing fans in the first place. It was about whether the team's approach is fully leveraging the talents that make Caitlin Clark one of the most impactful and talked about players in the sport. And until that question is answered on the court, the conversation is unlikely to go away.
The organization is a straight up clown show at this point. And then not only that, they have not addressed the smear campaign. They've gone out of their way to address any and everything else. They refuse to address the smear campaign led by Dan Dockich, who has been adamant about he's getting this information from the inside. Not only have they not addressed that, and he doubled down on it today. Dan Dockich was bombing again today. Stephanie White went on the same platform that took shots at Caitlin Clark and aired a hit piece. This is crazy. All of this is just flat out craziness. This Indiana Fever organization is a flat out joke.
Now let's bring Dan Dockich into the conversation, because his commentary has become a major part of the broader debate surrounding Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever. Over the past several months, Dockich has repeatedly offered sharp criticism of Clark's game, her leadership, and her role within the team's struggles. Through podcasts, interviews, and social media posts, he has continued to argue that many of the Fever's issues cannot simply be blamed on coaching, roster construction, or organizational decisions. His critics see something very different. They argue that Dakic has become one of the most persistent voices promoting a negative narrative around Clark, frequently emphasizing her mistakes, questioning aspects of her game, and placing a disproportionate amount of responsibility on her shoulders whenever the team faces adversity. Whether one agrees with Dakic or not, there is no denying that his comments generate attention. Every new criticism sparks debate, fuels social media discussions, and creates another round of arguments among fans. What many Clark supporters find particularly noteworthy is not necessarily what Dakic says, but what happens afterward. They point out that the organization rarely responds publicly to outside commentary, even when those remarks become controversial or generate significant backlash among the fan base. As a result, critics of the current situation often interpret the silence in different ways. Some view it as a normal organizational decision to avoid public disputes with media personalities. Others believe the lack of response allows certain narratives to gain momentum unchecked. That distinction matters, because the larger conversation isn't really about one commentator. It's about perception. It's about which narratives gain traction, which narratives get challenged, and which narratives are allowed to circulate without meaningful opposition. For supporters of Clark, that's where much of the frustration comes from. They feel that criticism of the team's biggest star often receives widespread attention, while context, nuance, and counterarguments struggle to receive the same level of amplification. Fair or unfair, that perception has become a significant part of the ongoing debate surrounding the Fever. And as long as prominent voices continue to weigh in from every angle, that conversation is likely to remain front and center.
Oh, yes, it has. How about this? She's acted like a jackass. People in the organization know she's acted like a jackass. They just had a couple-hour meeting initiated by the coaches, and the players took over because everybody's happy? Because the diva star is acting perfect? Oh, shut up, you two idiots. My God, I don't want to hear from these two clowns anymore. Camera has never been...
And this is where the conversation shifts from isolated incidents to perceived patterns. For many fans, any one of these events on its own could be explained away. A controversial media comment? That happens in sports. An injury designation that raises questions? Also common. A disagreement between reporters and an organization? Not exactly unprecedented. But critics argue that when multiple incidents are viewed together, they begin to tell a larger story. They point to what they see as a lack of public pushback against some of the harshest criticism directed at Caitlin Clark. They point to disputes involving media coverage of the team. They point to decisions and explanations that, from the outside, appear inconsistent or incomplete. And they point to situations like the Cunningham injury report that generated widespread speculation among the fan base. Individually, each event may have a reasonable explanation. Collectively, however, many supporters believe they create a perception problem. That's an important distinction. The argument being made by critics is not necessarily that there is a coordinated effort behind the scenes. Rather, they believe the organization's actions, or lack of action, have created an environment where certain narratives continue to grow while trust continues to erode. And once trust begins to erode, every new controversy is viewed through a different lens. Suddenly, routine decisions no longer look routine. Standard organizational silence no longer feels neutral. Fans begin connecting events that may otherwise appear unrelated, searching for a larger explanation that makes sense of everything they're seeing. Whether those conclusions are ultimately correct is almost beside the point. The fact that so many people are drawing those conclusions at all is what makes the situation significant. Because in professional sports, perception often becomes reality. Once enough fans start seeing a pattern, the burden shifts to the organization to provide clarity, transparency, and results that restore confidence. Right now, many observers believe the Indiana Fever are facing exactly that challenge. Not because every criticism is necessarily accurate, and not because every controversial moment proves something sinister, but because unanswered questions have a way of multiplying. And when enough unanswered questions pile up, people inevitably start connecting the dots for themselves. That is why this conversation continues to grow. It is no longer about a single quote, a single injury report, or a single media controversy. It is about whether fans still trust the explanations they are being given, and for a growing segment of the audience, that trust appears to be wearing thin.